I'm George غالاوي, and I present كلمة on Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George غالاوي, coming to you from London, but discussing Hong Kong. And inevitably, therefore, China. And inevitably, therefore, the many challenges which China is now facing, most of them coming from the West. I put my own cards on the table. My audience of distinguished experts will have their own cards, and hopefully we can respectfully agree to disagree where we do. My take is this. China is the most important country in the world. It will soon be the most powerful country in the world, and therefore there are many countries in the world determined to check its progress. They pick issues off the shelf in a bid to divide China or to divide international opinion about China, to make people fear China, hate China. And these are varied and wonderful. One is the demigod, the Dalai Lama, the question of Tibet. This, for a certain milieu, usually in Hollywood, and people who'd like to be in Hollywood, is a cause célèbre. Fading now, though still standing outside the Chinese embassy in London, is the obscure religious cult Falun Gong. And then there are issues of democracy and human rights, usually spouted by countries that are in league with the very enemies of democracy and human rights elsewhere. Saudi Arabia, anyone? China is not a democracy in the form that Western countries define it. But if being lifted out of poverty is a human right, China is the world champion. Because in the last 30 to 40 years, China has lifted more people out of poverty than any regime in any country in all human history. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the most important country in the world, and getting stronger by the day. The proximate cause of this discussion is one of these cause célèbres that they pick up and put down according to the prevailing narrative. And that subject is Hong Kong. Again, cards on the table. My view is that Hong Kong is China, was always China, was illegitimately taken from China. China was forced to sign an unequal treaty with the Western imperial countries, in this case, Great Britain. And therefore, what happens in Hong Kong is none of Britain's business. As Deng Xiaoping, the leader of the Chinese People's Republic, said to Prince Charles in answer to a toast on the handover, as they call it, of Hong Kong from Britain to China, Prince Charles had made some, helpful suggestions on how Hong Kong should be run in the future. And Deng Xiaoping answered, the days when foreign countries could give orders to China are over. And this is a truth that must be faced. Which is not to say that the people of Hong Kong, a special area of China, with a different economic system to the rest of China, which was the idea of the leadership of China as a means of reabsorbing back to the motherland, not just Hong Kong, but ultimately also Taiwan. One country, two systems. Well, people in Hong Kong are perfectly entitled to peacefully protest and demonstrate if they feel their interests, their rights, are being trampled upon. But that's not what happened in recent events in Hong Kong. The proximate cause of those events was an extradition treaty, though how you can extradite someone from one part of your own country to another part is, of course, open to debate. Now, that extradition treaty might have been a foolish move. Certainly, the leadership in Hong Kong now says that it was a foolish move. I have no view on that because I'm not Chinese, and it's not really my business. But the protests quickly turned into something else. They turned into a violent regime change operation. The Parliament building was broken into, sacked, and set on fire, a bit like the Mayadeen in the Ukraine. And, insult of all insults, the British colonial flag was hoisted inside the destroyed Parliament building. China promptly denounced British involvement in affairs in Hong Kong. Now, would that surprise anyone if perfidious Albion was continuing to interfere in the political life of their former colonies? Well, only if you were, frankly, an idiot. The British, on behalf of the United States, have continued to take what they would call a close interest, I would call a close interference in events in Hong Kong. One thing is for sure, anyone who thinks that China, this new powerful China, will allow the flag of a foreign country to be hoisted in a parliament building in their territory is really not thinking straight. These are my views. I believe that the Hong Kong events have been manipulated by the same people who conjure forth the issues that I have previously adumbrated. I missed one. We did a show upon it. The exacerbating of the actual existing problems with the Muslim minorities in China. We did a full show on it, you may recall. Those problems are real, but they are being acted on by Western countries who don't give a toss about Muslim rights anywhere else in the world except in China or anywhere else that takes their fancy from time to time. I believe that China is under full spectrum destabilization efforts from Western gunboats in the South China Sea, the clue is in the name, to all these other issues that I've talked about. The Dalai Lama, Falun Gong, human rights, democracy, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Uyghurs, all of these have a material basis, of course. They're not conjured out of nothing, but they are used by those who wish China ill, who wish to divide China because the unity of China is its ace card. All those people, all that economy, all that land, all that hard work. What's the only way it can be disrupted? Division, disunity. That's the game, at least from my point of view. As I say, those are my cards. Other cards are available. You, sir, play yours, if you will.
Well, I have to say, my name is Rod Y. I have to say my cards or my interpretation of the events is very different from yours. And my understanding of the facts is different from yours. For example, the quotation that you gave from Deng Xiaoping to Prince Charles at the handover, Deng Xiaoping was dead by then, so he could not have said it at that time. But as far as Hong Kong is concerned, you have suggested that it is the demonstrations there were the product of interference by the UK at the behest of the United States. I think the sight of 2 million people out of a population of about 6 million is something that cannot be organized by an outside power, however Machiavellian it may be. What happened in Hong Kong was an expression by people in Hong Kong of concern about the way that they felt that their society was going. You are quite right that it was sparked off by the mishandling, I think, by the Hong Kong government of the extradition treaty. The reason that it's an extradition is because there are different legal systems in Hong Kong and in China, and that was guaranteed by the Chinese government under its basic law and through the joint declaration with the British government. So it is understandable that there needs to be, or there should be, some kind of mechanism for handing fugitives back in both ways. But it is a very sensitive matter because the rule of law for Hong Kong, as the Hong Kong legal system as it is presently established, is clearly a very important matter for the people of Hong Kong, or for people in Hong Kong, and they felt strongly enough to come out and demonstrate in huge numbers. If you look at it in proportion to any other country, it is extraordinary. I think you are right to say that the eruption into the Legislative Council building was stupid and ill-judged, but it was a very few people who did that. And the demonstrations in Hong Kong have continued since that time for similar reasons to the original demonstrations. There is very strong feeling in Hong Kong about the way, let us say, the identity of the people in Hong Kong. That Hong Kong people feel that, yes, of course, Hong Kong is part of China, but they have a special identity in Hong Kong that they want to protect and that they feel was guaranteed to them through the basic law, the Chinese basic law, and that they feel is being increasingly disrespected, and they need to stand up. And I think we should all respect the people of Hong Kong, because, as you said in your introduction, China is huge now. China is very powerful now, and it is, I think, very brave of those people in Hong Kong to stand up for what they believed was right.
I should, of course, have said that the words of Deng Xiaoping were quoted at Prince Charles during the toast, during the handover, and they are, of course, germane. So my first question to you would be, do you acknowledge that it's none of Britain's business what happens in China? That whatever these issues are, and you're right, you've listed them, they are between the people of Hong Kong and the people of the rest of China. They're not Britain's affair.
There are sort of two elements to that. Of course, it is absolutely the right of people in a particular country to conduct their affairs in the way that they wish to do so. And indeed, that is what the Hong Kong people were standing up for, their wish to conduct their affairs in the way they wanted to do. So you're absolutely right there.
What gave Britain any rights
the interference
in
stuff,
Hong Kong?
The rights of Britain. The rights...
I suppose I'm asking you to acknowledge that we stole it under bombardment to punish China for
I'm not going to go into historical stuff.
Why not?
Well, I can. I mean, the history is quite clear.
We stole Hong Kong from China as a punishment for them refusing to allow us to sell opium in China.
The history is not in dispute of how Britain came to acquire Hong Kong as a colony, and it is not a glorious chapter in Britain's history. There's no doubt about that. But life has gone on since then, and there was an agreement between the British and Chinese governments about the restoration of Hong Kong to full Chinese sovereignty in 1997. And both Britain and China signed up to that agreement, the Joint Declaration on the Future of Hong Kong. I take issue to an extent with your word interference. What gives Britain the right to interfere? There is no right of Britain to interfere. But there is a right for Britain to comment on what happens in Hong Kong, because both Britain and China were signatories to that international treaty that was registered with the United Nations as an international treaty, and that gave obligations to both Britain and China. And China, of course, has the heavier responsibility in that the basic law and the future administration of Hong Kong come under the overall direction of the Central People's Government. But there is no
why do we
reason
have
for
so many MI6 men in Hong Kong? Are they there to comment?
I know nothing of MI6 men in Hong Kong or comments.
Okay, thanks for that, Rod. Let's take Ella. Ella, you're a leading communist here in Britain. What's your take on these events?
Well, George, quite honestly, your introduction said absolutely everything that I would have wanted to say. The only thing that I would like to draw attention to is the circumstances in which this extradition issue arose. A young man from Hong Kong with his very young, beautiful girlfriend went to Taiwan on holiday. And while in Taiwan, this young man murdered her, packed her into a suitcase and dumped her. He then returned to Hong Kong before the body was discovered. And the issue then arose. Hong Kong couldn't try him because apparently, unless the crime is committed on its territory, they're powerless. And they wanted to get him back to Taiwan to let the Taiwan authorities deal with him. And originally, that's exactly what the Taiwanese wanted. So for historic reasons, they were tied up with this non-extradition, etc., etc. But this was the Hong Kong authorities themselves, nothing to do with China. China itself hadn't interfered or been involved in any way in that decision. So look, this is absurd that people committing crimes abroad, and we can't deal with it and we can't send them abroad either, which is an absurdity which nobody would tolerate. You know, if you were the mother of that beautiful young girl, what would you feel about it, that you couldn't, that this criminal couldn't face justice, and what's more, would be roaming the streets of Hong Kong looking, as a danger to other young girls? So, this was totally absurd. But somehow they say that nobody interfered, but certainly the media picked it up as an issue and made it a huge matter that, if we allow this extradition, then everybody, all these young people who weren't even born, most of them, at the time when Hong Kong was handed back, then you're all liable to be sent to China, where a horrible fate will await you.
What about my overarching point about Western attempts to weaken China?
Well, of course they are. I mean, China is actually undermining the lifeblood of imperialism everywhere. So in Africa, in South America, in all the places where previously the imperialist corporations were able to suck blood by unequal contracts and unequal arrangements between them, then China jumps in and offers much better terms. So even if the American or the British or the European imperialists do get the contract for building the infrastructure, they have to offer more reasonable terms because they're in competition with China. Well, this is a disaster for the imperialist countries. This is a source of revenue that's not coming in. This means austerity at home. It means bad-tempered people, voting for Nigel Farage. It's a huge disaster, and of course they don't like it, and of course they're going to do everything they possibly can to undermine China, be it all the things that you mentioned. When you mentioned the Uyghurs, well, who are the people that are being rounded up by the Chinese for re-education? These are the jihadis. I personally think we could perhaps make an arrangement with China to send some of our jihadis there for re-education, except they have said they won't accept our rubbish anymore.
Who else would like a point of view? Sir, would you like to say something?
My name is Song Lianyi from SOAS, University of London. I don't think I have very clear views about what actually happened or who was behind it and so on. I have friends from mainland China, from Hong Kong, and I watched the news and so on. And the only thing that probably I would like to say is about the young people taking part in the protests and so on. I was young once. I took part in all kinds of protests and so on. But I'm totally against any violent behavior. And that's what I saw. Because if Hong Kong has a rule of law, people should do things according to the law. And then clearly many people broke the law and so on. On the one hand, I think we should be relatively lenient to the young people and try to understand what they were trying to do, and they probably were genuinely very angry and so on. But on the other hand, they should observe the law and so on. I think that's the only thing I would like to comment.
Well, Rod said it was stupid what they did, and also implied that it was only a small number who did it. But the thing that will be remembered is the colonial flag being hung inside the parliamentary chamber. If breaking into the building was stupid, the hoisting of the flag was a clear provocation, wasn't it?
Well, I can understand that people have different views, and some probably had very strong views and so on. Some people would probably do just to the extreme to make their point. I can understand that. I mean, I wouldn't say it's stupid. I can understand in any kind of situation like that, some people would be carried away, and the atmosphere was so overwhelming. Some people would act very, very.
Yeah, it must have been premeditated. I mean, who goes around with the old colonial flag with the British Union Jack in the corner in their pocket?
It can
just
be.
Happens to find themselves inside the Parliament building and just happens to hang it. That had to be premeditated.
It could be, but again, I mean, in a kind of situation like that, you would inevitably have people who would act very, very differently and provocatively. I think I could understand that. It's just that I'm not saying that I support that, but I can, as an intellectual or as an academic, I think, okay, well, while we give people freedom of expression, and some people would just take it to the extreme.
Okay, finally then, what's your view on Rod's critique that actually the extradition treaty was just the tip of the iceberg, that there is a widespread feeling that the agreement is not being properly respected, that Hong Kong's specific identity is not being fully implemented?
It's very hard for me to say whether it is the case. However,
is this your answer at SOAS when students ask you difficult questions?
No, not really, because it says that I know people. As I said, I know people from Hong Kong.
Yeah,
they're angry.
You're a top academic, so give me an answer, please.
No, I understand that people are angry with many things. Therefore, if there is no opportunity, they would just come out and
please tell us some of the issues that they're unhappy with.
Well,
purely academically, you don't have to identify with one or the other.
That's right. For example, in the education in Hong Kong, how they teach Chinese history, for example, the certain aspects of history, whether they should highlight the Communist Party's contributions and so on, ideology and things like that. Use of Mandarin, for example, I can say that. People are unhappy about that. Well, it's fine. So if they have freedom of expression, they are allowed to express them. It's that the situation that has given them the opportunity to put all their anger together in one
basket.
Yeah.
Much more of this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, talking about Hong Kong. We took the كلمة camera onto the streets of London to see what the people thought. Take a look.
Who do you think is behind the protests in Hong Kong?
I think it might be the British, because Hong Kong has been a British colony.
From my understanding, the Hong Kong have always been very wanting to keep their democratic values even after, they started to get reintegrated. I mean, they had the umbrella protests a few years back. So I think that even, at least at the core of it, the Hong Kong people do actually care about these reforms, and that is where the majority of the care and the want to protest is coming out.
I feel the people who are against the extradition, like the big giants who runs the economy, like the people who plans these frauds, they are the ones who oppose these extraditions, and they are the one behind these protests.
I think that the people are behind the protest because they don't want the rules of another government to go over the rules of where they stay.
My impression is that it's an organic, homegrown sort of movement.
I think obviously a lot of native Hong Kongers, I think they're quite proud of actually being separate to China, having their own identity, obviously having their own judicial system. I do think there's also an aspect of the international community looking at how they can destabilise China, and this is obviously a huge blemish on, on China's international kind of public affairs.
If there's, foreign powers influencing that, there's probably a likelihood that that's the case, but I think there's a lot of genuine unrest there as well.
Do you think the Hong Kong Chinese consider that they're different to the mainland Chinese, and if so, why?
Yes, they do, because they're culturally different. They have lived in different diversities, different type of democracy, different kind of thought and opinions they share. Like, if you talk about any countries, religions and cultures change with every 100 kilometers. And so, like, mainland China has very different opinions, and Hong Kong seems to be more developed, more modernized as compared to mainland China. So obviously the people who have different thinking, different diversities they belong to.
Yeah, I think they might feel that they're different compared to other Chinese because they've been under different laws, and their culture might be still influenced by some of the British because they've been a colony.
My impression is that speaking with people from Hong Kong, I don't think they see the differences. They don't see themselves as completely different, but there are obviously, it's factors, it's social factors, I think, more than anything.
Let's take the gentleman in the back row. Yes, sir.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rasmi from London. And thank you for Mr. غالاوي to give me opportunity to put my card. Now, we have heard and seen on the public, lady and gentlemen at the front have this debate, and no one ever thought in different view that I thought. As far as I can see and have a good look at it, the situation is have a little bit of conspiracy into the situation that we have seen the biggest demonstration in the world, I can say, and how these, social media and everything, they influence into this. Of course, obviously, every eye in this world were pointing into the U.S. and Britain. Well, there is a little bit of if nobody has seen anything that so mystery like MS-370 or MS-17 or any other issue that no answer to it. What we have seen is a Union Jack lay on the parliament in Hong Kong. And don't you ever think that Beijing had something to do about it? In every demonstration in anywhere in the world, the Chinese is very clever now these days. They have everything like what the Western have. They have, form of MI5, CIA, and in every demonstration or any event, they will send their men into these places.
You think the Chinese themselves might have staged this provocation? Is that your point?
Yes.
Okay. Let's take the gentleman in the middle.
Yes, my name is Joshua from London. This is about as impartial and as even-handed as I can get when I make this point. In the case of China, it would be self-defeating of them to not recognise the devolved power, if you like, to Hong Kong, because that would just make Britain appear like the liberator, which it is not. Obviously, the UK government is only interested because of its own interests, not because of the interests of the Hong Kong people at large. But the thing is, it's in China's interest to recognise that they do have their own distinct language, judiciary system. And while I do not favour breaking up any country, not least China, I believe in the unity of the majority of the world's nations, I do think that they've got to understand that there is a need for, recognising their... Is it federal or is it devolved? I mean, how...
Devolved.
Devolved, yes. They do need to recognise devolution, just as I support devolution for regions within the UK itself, Scotland, Wales, etc. I can't in the same breath say the Chinese are right to interfere in the democratic processes of Hong Kong. But having said that...
Both propositions can be true, can't they? There can be entirely legitimate concerns felt by hundreds of thousands of people, and there can also be a conspiracy from foreign countries. Both of these things can exist simultaneously.
Oh, no, agreed. But I think that, in refusing to recognise the rights of the protesters, the Chinese would just be playing right into the hands of the UK government. And that is why I think that the Chinese have to take a step back, not as much as Britain does, because as far as the 1997 agreement was, Britain has completely severed any legitimate influence it's got in Hong Kong. It doesn't have any more right to, actively intervene any more than, Madagascar would have the right to intervene, as was recognised back in 1997. But the Chinese have to also recognise that the autonomy of Hong Kong, if they are to retain it. Otherwise, if they don't, it's just going to encourage residents of Hong Kong to think that the Chinese are the occupiers, and might even possibly, brainwash them into thinking that Britain are the liberators, which they're not. It was never democratic, Britain's possession.
Well, it is, actually, that error was made by several people on the Vox Pop, who talked about Hong Kong's democratic values before the handing back. It's really important to stress that there were absolutely no democratic values in Hong Kong before it was handed back to China.
Well, the irony is it is more democratic when it was handed back to China, even though China is, for all intents and purposes, a dictatorship.
Let's hear from the lady in the front.
Hello, Tammy Al-Kabani. Where do I start? I'm sure the Chinese government must be sitting back and saying, OK, let's, take some advice from the British government, about Falkland Islands, Northern Ireland, and say, you know what? And if they do, they'll probably send a few dozen soldiers in and kill a few people and, and take authority that way. So if China does go by the UK's example, then there'll be a few dead bodies, and then I'm sure that will all be resolved and they can continue their authority stamp. The British regime are not... not
the best place to give advice.
Not at all, especially, and I object to this notion that we can just shove history out the way. No, we can't. The 100-year humiliation of China is over. It's finished. And to have built, for a so-called democratic regime of the UK to take hold of a country and to sell opium to the Chinese in exchange for tea, to sell back into the UK, and that's how the history of Hong Kong was made, and we're just going to forget about that? No, we don't. No, we don't. It was built on drugs, and we don't just forget about that conveniently when we decide to do that, because 100 years from now, we're not going to repeat history. And also media has a huge effect. It's funny how we're focusing media on all these demonstrations. Oh, there's 2 million people on the streets, in Hong Kong. And there's also many people in Bahrain. There's also actually many people in Syria supporting their government.
What about France? It's only 29 miles away, and there's every Saturday afternoon.
There's not. I mean, come on, exactly. The numbers. There's protesters killed in France, and I'll tell you what. Let's get out on the streets of London and protest against the British regime. Let's do that, because I'll tell you what, there'll be a few dozen water cannons and a few dozen soldiers pointing guns at your head and making sure you stay silent. So let's put that to the test first. Let's come let's come and talk about what's going on in the UK, and let's see how we're treated here.
We could try and hang a Russian flag in the British Parliament.
Let's do that.
Let's take this gentleman here at the front.
I'm originally from Iraq, and I'm very glad to be here with you guys.
Thank you.
It's regarding the Hong Kong issue. I think there's a big picture to this. The Silk Road China is intending to create, this is going to be very, very major on the industrial world, whose America is leading now, but not for much longer. I think that has got something to do with it. It's all about money, George. Unfortunately, 2 million people went demonstrating in London, saying no blood for oil, when my country was invaded. And even the Pope John Paul II said there's going to be a catastrophe in Iraq if the invasion was going to happen, and it happened. And it killed members of my family, destroyed the country, and look where we are now in Iraq. You know? So please don't interfere in other people's business. Let them take care of themselves. Let them sort out their own issues. And the West cannot carry on interfering into other people's business for their own interest forever. It's not right. Thank you very much.
Ella, I have no relations with the Chinese government or Communist Party, but you know them better than me. If there's a battle of hearts and minds going on, as there must be between Beijing and the people in Hong Kong, would it be fair to say that China is not yet winning that battle?
Well, they've obviously suffered a bit of a setback with the present situation, but 5 years ago when they had the big umbrella movement, in actual fact, it interfered with trade and business, that the leading lights in Hong Kong said, no, we don't want this. You know, we want to carry on. We want to be part of China, and you know, we want peace and quiet. So basically, normally, they are being extremely circumspect. You've mentioned that when they brought in this curriculum that everyone was making a hue and cry about, they withdrew it. When they brought in this extradition, everyone was up, and they've withdrawn that too. So it's not that the Chinese government isn't using its best endeavours. And I think one has to trust them to be able to negotiate. At the moment, people are encouraged by the outside, are in a we're not prepared to negotiate measure. You know, we want the Hong Kong administration dissolved. We demand this, we demand that, we demand the other. Well, if people are in that mode, there's not a lot you can do, but I don't think they'll keep it up that long because, you know, you have to get on with life, and it's very counterproductive to find yourself acting as a tool for undermining China when you're yourself part of China. It's a silly thing to do, and I'm sure the penny is going to drop very shortly. I would trust the Chinese government entirely to do what's right by Hong Kong, and I don't trust Britain or America to do what's right by Hong Kong. That's the long and the short of it.
Professor, what does this all mean for Taiwan? The big enchilada, I suppose, bigger than Hong Kong, more important even than Hong Kong. The one country, two systems was supposed to pave the way, or at least pave a way that could later be taken to reintegrate Taiwan, which is equally a part of China, but has a different system and, for now, a separate state.
Well, I don't think I can answer that straight away because I've never thought it carefully. However, I totally agree with you. Originally, I mean, this one country, two systems was designed probably for the unification of all China and so on. Personally, I thought it was a very good model, and it should be workable. But therefore, what's happening in Hong Kong, what has happened in Hong Kong, for example, is vitally important to the Chinese government because they want the world to see it as a good example, especially for the people in Taiwan. And at the moment, I think I quite agree with this gentleman over there. the Chinese government probably would stress on one country, whereas the Hong Kong people probably would expect more, two systems. Or look at Britain. It's one country, and they have different regions like Wales, Scotland, and so on. They have their own possibly laws, rules, and so on, education systems, and so on. But this kind of model, I mean, the Chinese government is looking for a good model that is workable. Britain could be a good example. However, if there are riots,
God help them if they take us as an example.
It's just if it happens, if it goes bad. For example, there are riots and so on. It's bad for either side.
Of course.
Yeah.
Rod, because I have you here and you're an expert, in a way, this idea of one country, two systems, a possible way forward for the Korean Peninsula also, isn't it?
Now we are wandering around the world a bit. Just to return to Taiwan, first of all, the attraction of one country, two systems to most people in Taiwan, the vast majority of people in Taiwan, is nil these days.
Really?
Most people in Taiwan.
I thought that reunification sentiment was growing.
From the polling you see, most people in Taiwan describe themselves as Taiwanese, and absolutely Taiwanese, and fewer and fewer as, almost none as Chinese, and fewer and fewer as Taiwanese Chinese. And similarly, the pressure for unification is pretty much absent. None of the big parties, even the nationalist Kuomintang party, does not stand for unification anymore.
So no chance, you think, of Taiwan, China?
As a political settlement under the current conditions, no. But conditions change.
And you won't bite on my Korean point.
And to go to Korea, I mean, the Koreans, I think, all do agree that there is but one Korea. There are two countries and two very different systems there. And so far, we have seen, despite many initiatives over the years, there's actually been no progress, no substantial progress towards a real reconciliation on the Korean.
Of course, there are people seeking to keep Korea divided, usually the same people that want to divide China.
I'm not going to comment on that one. I disagree with you on this idea that the UK and the US are out to divide China by supporting demonstrations in Hong Kong or by encouraging demonstrations in Hong Kong. I really think that is fantasy. There are real problems.
I'm a well-known fantasist.
There are real problems between the US and China. That is absolutely the case.
Sure.
And this is going to be one of the fundamental political issues for the world in the years.
But as a matter of logic, if you have a problem with a country that is getting more and more powerful and rich, you kind of have, as a matter of objective logic, an interest in causing problems in it, don't you?
I don't. I think you have an interest in finding a way of living with it. I don't think necessarily you have.
Well, let me give you one of which I have personal knowledge. In the early 1990s, I was the leader of a campaign to defend the Saudi opposition in exile in London. And in the course of my work, I used to hear people talking about someone of whom I had never heard before, called Osama bin Laden. And I heard them talk about how Osama bin Laden was being oriented towards China and the Xinjiang province to work on the pre-existing problems between Beijing and the Muslim minorities in China. Of this I know. And the people doing the reorienting were Americans who at that stage had not quite broken with Osama bin Laden. Of course, disastrously, they did break from each other at very, very great human cost. So I know that to be true, that the United States was trying to divide China in Xinjiang along the axes of the Muslim minority. I know that.
Well, I can't comment on your particular knowledge because I was not privy to any of those conversations, quite obviously.
No, in fact, we were campaigning against your Foreign Office at the time, which was trying to kick him out.
Nevertheless, I mean, I am really glad that you have raised again this whole question of the situation in Xinjiang at the moment. I just cannot and do not accept, in your words as a matter of logic, that 1.5 million people of all ages and sexes are all jihadis in Xinjiang.
No, I don't accept that either. As I say, we did a whole program on it.
The numbers are appalling, and anyone who watched...
The numbers are contested, but it's a very large number of people.
Anyone who watched those programs that went out on ITV, I think, a few weeks ago...
Must be true then.
No, not necessarily must be true, but would be appalled by what they saw.
I agree with that. Let me ask Ella about that.
To be fair to them, there were also quotations from Chinese officials running some of those institutions. And the kind of things that they were saying was equally chilling. Yeah. And I think it should not be underestimated, whatever your politics, whatever you may feel about the past history of the UK government or the American government or the Saudis, what is happening in Xinjiang is appalling.
Yeah, but you'll have to forgive me saying so. We don't give a damn what's happening to the Muslims in Bahrain. In fact, we're arming the government of Bahrain in order to kill them. Why should I believe you or your government cares about Muslims in Xinjiang? Can't you see the double standards?
Yes, I can, but if you care about the people in Bahrain, why do you not care about the people in Xinjiang?
Yeah, but it's
the same argument.
No, it isn't the same argument, because you've got all the guns.
I have no...
I'm not giving guns to anyone. Your government are giving guns to the regime in Bahrain to kill Muslims. And you at the same time ask us to believe that you care about Muslims in China. Well, that would make a horse laugh.
And the British regime were also...
I just gave Bahrain. I could easily give Syria. I could give Palestine. I could give any number of examples.
Were training the Burmese army while they were
to kill Rohingya.
Thank you.
Now, Ella, notwithstanding what I've just said, China is handling its Muslim problem very badly. And I told them so many years ago by branding a very large number of people. It might not be 1.5 million, but it might be 1 million or it might be just under 1 million. Either way, it's a lot of people. By branding them as jihadists, they're making them jihadists. Trust me, you said Northern Ireland earlier. When you intern scores of thousands of Catholics in the north of Ireland as terrorists, a lot of them become terrorists. Ella?
Yeah, well, I don't personally have any knowledge of what the re-education program that the Chinese have consists of. It has been pretty effective. And, you know, something has to be done about people being radicalized and then used as cannon fodder, basically at the behest of America, to go along causing trouble everywhere. I'm not an expert on how you de-radicalize people, but I have no reason to think that the Chinese aren't doing an effective job. Now,
well, rounding people up and putting them in re-education camps doesn't sound like a good idea to me.
Well, I don't know quite how they do it, but I mean, what would you do with the young men and the young women who are teenagers, not fully responsible, and who get radicalized and then sent to slaughter people? Then we don't want to have them back in this country.
Let's hear from the lady in the middle.
Yeah, my name is Cheryl. Right now, there are over 60,000 Uyghurs in Idlib. And those Uyghurs seem to have been recruited by Turkey and came through the northern border. And I think a couple of years ago when China tried to go to Syria to offer some help in trying to, sort them out, they were told by the USA no uncertain terms that they must keep out. But back to the extradition business. Jeremy Hunt is a hypocrite because he is getting his knickers in a twist about the Hong Kong people who are displaying their right to protest about the extradition. However, when the UN rapporteur on torture came and gave his report, he was very arrogant about the torturing of Julian Assange in Belmarsh prison. He's happy to extradite an innocent man to the USA. This guy who murdered that young girl should be facing justice in Taiwan. They are stopping this extradition, but they're happy to extradite Julian Assange, an innocent journalist, for doing journalism. It's complete hypocrisy. The protest of itself makes me remember the Mayadeen, because that is exactly what happened in the Mayadeen protest in Ukraine. They stormed the Rada, they were destroying everything. These are paid protesters. They're paid protesters in between the wedge issue of, identity, their different identity. That's my point.
Well, a lot of people don't need paying to be extreme. I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. I've been George Galloway. This has been كلمة on Al Mayadeen Television.